Good afternoon, everybody. Love the introduction from Tim about the fact that there's happy hour after this, so I'll be brief as I go through. Thank you for taking time out of your day to hear more about Orca Bio, and thank you to ARM for having us. Orca Bio spun out of Irv Weissman's lab at Stanford in 2016. And Irv, if you're familiar with his work of mapping the human stem cell, really helped pioneer cell therapy. And that's where we came from. We've treated over 350 patients in our clinical trials with our lead 2 assets in phase 1, 2, and phase 3 studies. We're going initially after the allogeneic stem cell transplant market to replace allo transplant with a better, more efficacious, and safer product. And looking at where we are, it's not only addressing GVHD, infection, and other things, but also to increase survival and relapse-free survival in these patients. Our IP position is robust, and our financial position, we made the decision in 2021 to stay private, so we've been able to avoid all the distractions other companies have had during the last several years and just focus on the patient and bringing our programs forward. Our leadership team on the left is, those are our 3 founders. Ivan Dimoff, who is our CEO, he's the engineer. Ivan and Nate, the next one on this list, came directly from Irv's lab. Nate is our cell biologist, he's our CSO, and he's focused on developing the different, what we call formulations or recipes that go into the platform. Jerome Beckard, his experience as COO and one of the founders is building manufacturing plants, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I joined the team in December 2020. My background and history, I've been in cell therapy since 2016, the second commercial hire at Juno Therapeutics, building out marketing and market access there. Lauren Smith, who heads our quality, came over from Catalent. Josh Murray, our chief financial officer, came from Goldman Sachs. And Scott McClellan, our chief medical officer, came from Genentech. So we have a mix of different background and experiences, both academic and industry, bringing us forward. And of course, we have our advisors. Steve Devine, who's Chief Medical Officer at National Marrow Donor Program, is one of our key advisors. We have 2 former CEOs, Ted Love, who was CEO at Global Bread Therapeutics, and Joe Jimenez, who was CEO of Novartis when they launched Kymriah, advising us, as well as Irv Weissman, who Irv stays around the programs. Our platform is different than other allogeneic cell therapy companies. We are matching a donor to a patient. And the idea is to replace a diseased immune system with a healthy one. What we do is we take the cells from the patient. We do this in real time in a matter of hours. Our turnaround time is less than 72 hours to go through our platform from the donor's vein into the patient's vein. And this allows us to create a designer immune system in these patients. So when you look at the clinical trial results that we've had to date, we've shown a lot of promise in our system and the ability to scale. As we look at our pipeline, this is kind of what we've said publicly in there. We have some other projects that we're working on, but our main focus has been Orca T, which is our lead program. There, our strategy is to replace allogeneic stem cell transplant in matched donors. Our first indication we'll go after is AML, ALL, and MDS. I'll share some data there. Our second product, we share data in the haplo environment. This is when you have a not matched donor, but you have a haplo mismatched donor. That is Orca Q. That's a separate product. We're not going to go through data today, but you can look at, we've presented that at several congresses now, and we've seen tremendous results with that product. We also have Orca M, which is kind of our gateway with Orca Q, getting into non-malignant and autoimmune. We'll talk about the size of those markets in a little bit. And we have several other programs that we're working on. Orca T, our main focus. If you can look at the data that we've seen, in our studies, we've treated about 200 patients in single-arm trials, and we're currently in a phase 3 trial. I'll go through that in the next slide. But looking at Orca T, one thing we found out in the trial was that you could actually not only reduce toxicity of GVHD with Orca T, but you're able to get more aggressive up front because non-relapse mortality was seen at a very low incidence, even with aggressive conditioning regimens. So what you'll see here is 71 patients that were inside of the phase 1B and phase 2 trials that would have qualified for our phase 3. And looking at that with Buflu and Thiatepa, which usually has a 10 to 20% non-relapse mortality associated with it, we've published data on this at 1 to 2%. So we do see a survival benefit as well. But looking at this data right here, GVHD and relapse-free survival, what we've seen with Orca T compared to a contextual cohort, this is not randomized, our phase 3 is, but we've seen an 81% GVHD and relapse-free survival versus a 34%. Overall survival, we're seeing at 94% in these patients versus an expected just sub 70% at 68%. Relapse-free survival is riding at the high 80s compared to what usually is seen at 62% at a year. And then moderate severe chronic GVHD, we're seeing a very low percentage there, about 5%. You'd expect about 40% of these patients to get this in the first year. So again, we can get aggressive with the therapy. We see benefits not only with reducing toxicities, but also that potential to increase survival in these patients. These patients, as we go into the phase 3 trial, our phase 3 trial is in AML, ALL, and MDS. We're looking at matched donors. The primary endpoint for this trial is chronic GVHD-free survival, so survival is in our primary endpoint. Key secondary endpoints to look at are relapse-free survival, overall survival, that GVHD and relapse-free survival, which is kind of that I guess we want to say perfect holy grail, et cetera, but that's the aspirational survival for all patients at this stage with it. And we're looking at GVHD, both acute and chronic, as well as infections. One of the things, too, to point out here is we've been used with a lot of the top centers in the U.S. 22 centers have currently used Orca-T in their practice, and 19 are actively participating in our phase 3 trial. So we have a good geographic representation of the country, but also, too, we have different sizes of institutions in there, and we have a lot of support in the KOL community. Looking here, and I'm the commercial lead, so of course I'm always going to bring up value, and I think that's getting entwined, especially in this meeting, about looking at what your product will do to increase value. So I mentioned that GVHD and relapse-free survival endpoint. This is a study that recently was out, published in June of this year, that looked at what happens if you just double those patients that get GVHD and relapse-free survival. And what you can see in the outcome is you'll see about $500,000 to almost $750,000 benefit of just improving that one endpoint. And this is not factoring in other products that have been improved since the study was done, such as the Rezurox, the ibrutinibs, other products that are very costly to treat chronic GVHD, and that's a condition that we seek to avoid. We are not GVHD prophylaxis. We are a replacement for allogeneic stem cell transplant that does not have the toxicities of that transplant, so you don't need those products afterwards. Our manufacturing facility is up. We anticipate treating patients out of that next year as we finish up our trial. I will say our phase 3 trial, we're in the final stages of enrollment right now, and we're looking forward for data in 2024 for that. The overall potential of Orca Bio, and this is something that we always get back to, looking at where we start. So the company right now, we're starting to replace allogeneic transplant. That's where we're going to start. We're going to start in blood cancers, AML, ALL, and MDS, which is where most transplants happen today. If you can look at where we're going to go as a company, the next step would be non-malignant heme. And then we actually have had some interesting work, and this is public, but we've been combining an allogeneic approach with our product and an allo CAR T made out of the same donor. And Stanford's been releasing some data on that recently. And we've seen tremendous promise out of that to go into other blood cancers, myeloma, lymphoma, et cetera. And then, of course, getting into autoimmune, this idea of every other place I've mentioned, you've used allotransplant or people have used allotransplant and we've seen results. So therefore, that's kind of our proof of concept, and we're showing that in the data. But what if you could replace immune systems in the autoimmune area with a healthy donor? That's something that we want to explore as a company, and that's kind of our long-term vision of where we want to go. And we're starting that work in the very near future, and I can't talk too much about that, but that is something we see out in the future. But right now, we're focused on replacing transplant. So one of the things to talk about is where's 2024 lead for Orca Bio? And one of the things that we like to mention is we've gone a long way in a short period of time. And 2024 is when we expect our clinical trial to read out our phase 3 and moving forward with the FDA. We did get RMAT designation from them, and we've been in constant discussion about moving the product forward. So what we'll do is we'll release data on that next year, and then looking at where we are of advancing into a commercialized product in the US and in Europe as our first two focuses. Asia is a focus, but to be very transparent, our priorities are the US and Europe right now as we build out with a smaller company. And then, of course, looking beyond blood cancer. As I mentioned before, there's a tremendous opportunity once we keep proving this concept and moving forward with it to develop products that help patients that currently right now don't have a long-term solution in front of them. And as we always like to do to end on the patient, I don't know if any of you had heard about Mikhail, but the Wall Street Journal featured him in an article they did back in January talking about access to innovative care for the elderly. And Mikhail's a patient of ours. He was 71 years old when he received Orca T. Traditionally, he would have gotten a reduced intensity conditioning transplant, and he opted in for the Orca T trial. And in our single arm phase, which we still have open, we have an opportunity for elderly patients to get into it. So thank you to our partners at Memorial Sloan Kettering and at Stanford who treated Mikhail. They got together and put Mikhail on Orca T. His experience there was we were extremely happy and pleased with what he came out on the other side with. He did not experience chronic GVHD at all, and he also is 2 years out and cancer-free. So when we always say what brings it back to the patient with it, he can now be with his grandchildren and has a great lease on life, and he bikes all the time with it and loves to share stories with our employees about how well he's doing. So with that, I want to thank you all, and I'm getting you one step closer to that happy hour, right? Thank you.